The first thing my daughter said when she saw the lake house I had inherited was not, "Dad, I'm glad you finally caught a break." She walked through the front door, looked at the stone fireplace, the wall of windows facing the water, and said, "Darren and I should take the upstairs suite. You don't need that much space by yourself." Her husband was already outside measuring the dock with his eyes. 7 years earlier, those same two people had refused to let me sleep in their finished basement when I was recovering from surgery and had nowhere else to go. Now they had arrived with two SUVs, matching weekend bags, and my grandchildren in the back seat as if the property had been waiting for them all along. I asked how they even knew I owned it. My daughter avoided my eyes. Darren smiled and said, "Family hears things." Then he pointed toward the old caretaker cottage near the tree line and added, "Honestly, Walter, that little place would be perfect for you. Less maintenance. Safer too." I stood on the porch of the first home I had owned outright in my entire life, and realized my own family had driven 5 hours to move me out of it before they had even asked whether I was happy. I told them they were not moving in. My daughter's face changed instantly. "After everything we've been through, you're really going to choose a house over your family?" she asked. 6 weeks later, at Thanksgiving, I would discover that the house was only part of what they wanted. They had already made a private family group chat called Dad's Next Step, discussed how soon I could be convinced to sell, calculated what their share might be, and even planned the photograph they would post online after I agreed, so everyone could see our beautiful family reunion. What they did not understand was that the man they had abandoned 7 years earlier no longer believed being useful was the same thing as being loved. My name is Walter Gaines. I was 64 when all of this happened, living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and working 3 mornings a week, repairing equipment for a vocational training center after spending most of my adult life as a union electrician. I had never been wealthy. I was the kind of man who knew exactly how long a water heater could make one more winter and who kept old coffee cans full of screws because throwing away perfectly good hardware felt immoral. My wife, Marlene, died 12 years earlier after a long illness, and most of what we had saved disappeared into the years around her care. I never resented that. If somebody had told me I could buy another month with her by selling the roof off the house, I probably would have asked whether they wanted the shingles or the plywood too. After Marlene died, my daughter Meredith became the center of my family life. She was 29 then, married to Darren Holt, and raising two children, June and Eli. Meredith had always been practical, ambitious, and a little too impressed by appearances. Darren encouraged that. He sold high-end kitchen remodels around Madison and drove a truck polished enough to see your regrets in the paint. Together, they bought a large house in a development with a neighborhood clubhouse and annual Christmas light competition. They were not bad people in every moment. That would make the story easier. Meredith used to bring me soup when I was sick. Darren once spent an entire Saturday helping me replace porch boards. The children loved staying with me. Families rarely break because everyone becomes evil on the same afternoon. They break because one person keeps giving, another keeps taking, and everybody becomes so accustomed to the arrangement that eventually saying no looks like betrayal. My arrangement began with money. When Meredith and Darren wanted to buy their first house, they were short on the down payment. I gave them $24,000, nearly everything left from the sale of the small home Marlene and I had owned. "We'll pay you back," Meredith promised. I told her not to worry about it until they were stable. They never mentioned repayment again. 2 years later, Darren's remodeling business hit a bad stretch after he expanded too fast. I lent them $11,000 more. That money was definitely supposed to come back. Instead, the business recovered. They renovated their kitchen, and Darren bought a fishing boat. I did not ask. I told myself parents were not supposed to keep ledgers against their children. Then at 57, I lost the maintenance job I had taken after leaving full-time electrical work. The company consolidated. My severance was small. 3 months later, I had a heart problem serious enough to put me in the hospital and keep me from physical work for nearly half a year. Even with insurance, the bills were ugly. I sold my little condo. I paid what I could. For the first time since I was 18, I did not know where I would be living in a month. I called Meredith. I did not ask for money. I asked whether I could stay in their basement for 6 or 8 weeks while I recovered and found something affordable. They had a finished basement with a bathroom, television, and guest room I had personally helped wire. Meredith became quiet. "Dad, can I call you back?" she asked. She called 2 hours later with Darren on speaker. Darren did most of the talking. Walter, we've thought about it, and we just don't think it's healthy, he said. Healthy for who? The kids. They're at an age where stability matters. I'd be in the basement. That's still another adult in the house. Meredith jumped in then. Dad, we love you. We just don't want temporary to turn into permanent. I remember staring at the motel wall while she said it. I'm asking for 2 months. Darren sighed. You've had a lifetime to plan for retirement. We can't become responsible because you didn't. That sentence did something to me. Not because he was entirely wrong that adults should plan, but because he was sitting in a house I had helped them buy, discussing responsibility as if generosity had never flowed in his direction. I asked Meredith whether that was how she felt. There was a long silence. Then she said, I think Darren is trying to protect our household. I told them I understood. I did not. I spent 10 weeks in an extended stay motel near the interstate, then moved into a small apartment over a barber shop because it was what I could afford. Meredith visited once during those years. She came alone, brought store-bought cookies, looked around the apartment and said, at least it's cozy. I almost laughed. The grandchildren got older. Invitations became less frequent. When I could not afford to contribute much to Christmas, the visits became shorter. I stopped being included in their annual vacation photos. Meredith told me the kids' schedules were impossible. Darren once said I should not take it personally if they did not want to drive into the city every other weekend. I did not remind him I had driven to Madison twice a week for 6 months when June was a baby because childcare was expensive. I became the father everyone loved in theory and visited when convenient. The one person who never let me disappear completely was my oldest friend, Silas Monroe. Silas and I had met at 19 while apprenticing for the same electrical contractor. He was 6 months older and approximately 20 years more stubborn. We worked jobs together across Wisconsin for decades. Silas never married. He came close once, but the relationship ended and he decided he preferred dogs, boats, and property taxes to romantic risk. In his 40s, he bought a rundown fishing resort near Minocqua in northern Wisconsin. Over the next 20 years, he rebuilt it slowly. Cedar Hollow Lodge sat beside a clear lake surrounded by pine and birch, with a main timber house, an old guest cottage, a boathouse, 2 small cabins, and about 40 acres of forest. Silas called it the most expensive way imaginable to avoid neighbors. I visited when Marlene was alive. Later, when money became tight, trips were harder. Silas offered to pay for gas. Pride made me refuse too often. We spoke every few weeks until the last year of his life, when both of us became lazy about believing there would be more time. Then, one October morning, a woman from his estate office called to tell me Silas had died in his sleep. He had left Cedar Hollow to me. I thought she had the wrong Walter Gaines. She did not. Silas had no children. His closest cousins had spent years contacting him mostly when they needed money. Apparently, he decided an old electrician living above a barber shop deserved the lake more. I drove north 3 days later. The first sight of Cedar Hollow nearly stopped me. The lake was silver beneath an overcast sky. Yellow leaves covered the gravel drive. The lodge looked both grand and worn, like an old man standing straight because nobody had told him he could sit down. Inside, everything smelled like wood smoke, cedar, and Silas's terrible coffee. His boots were still beside the back door. A flannel shirt hung on a hook. I sat at his kitchen table and cried for a man I should have visited more while he was alive. Grief and gratitude mixed in ways that made me uncomfortable. I had inherited peace from someone who could no longer enjoy it. For the first week, I did almost nothing. I walked the shoreline, split wood, opened cupboards, found handwritten labels on everything because Silas apparently believed future owners might forget what forks were. At night, I slept better than I had in years. Then Meredith arrived. I had not told her directly about the inheritance. My cousin Roland knew because Silas's death had been mentioned locally, and Roland still followed northern Wisconsin property news for reasons nobody understood. Apparently, Roland told Meredith. She texted me for the first time in almost 3 months. Dad, I heard about Silas. I'm sorry. Are you at the lake? I answered yes. She sent, we should come see you. I should have noticed the word should. 3 days later, 2 vehicles came down the drive. Meredith stepped out wearing an expensive cream coat. Darren parked beside her pulling his fishing boat. The sight of the boat almost made me laugh. They had not even asked whether the dock could handle it. June was 17, tall and guarded. Eli was 14 and looked uncomfortable being there. Meredith hugged me tightly. Dad, this is incredible. Darren walked around like somebody inspecting a property before closing. How many bedrooms? He asked before saying hello. 4 in the main house. In that cottage? 2, he whistled. You realize what this would rent for in summer? I'm not renting it, he grinned. Yet. They toured without waiting to be invited. Meredith opened closets. Darren checked the boathouse. June took pictures of the lake. Eli asked whether Silas had really lived there alone. Mostly. Wasn't he lonely? Sometimes being alone and being lonely are different. That boy listened. Adults rarely did. We ate sandwiches on the porch. Then Darren laid out the plan as if we had scheduled a meeting. Here's what makes sense. We sell our place in Madison while prices are good, move up here. I run the business remotely and pick up high-end cabin renovations in the area. Meredith can work hybrid. Kids finish school nearby. You use the caretaker cottage. We handle the property. I stared at him. You planned all that on the drive? Meredith smiled carefully. We've been talking since Roland told us. You've known 5 days. Exactly. Sometimes opportunities are obvious. Whose opportunity? Darren's smile slipped. Come on, Walter. This is family property now. No, it's my property. Meredith flinched as if I had sworn. Dad, nobody is taking anything from you. You just put me in the cottage. Because it's easier for you, she said. The main house has stairs. You have heart history. Wouldn't you rather have us nearby? For 1 second, the old loneliness touched me. I imagined June and Eli at the dock. Sunday dinners, noise in rooms that had held only Silas for years. Then I remembered a basement in Madison. No, I said. No what? Darren asked. You're not moving here. Meredith laughed nervously. We aren't asking permission to visit. Visit, yes. Move in, no. Darren leaned forward. You cannot maintain this alone. Then I'll hire help. With what money? Silas left enough for upkeep. That was true. Nothing dramatic, but enough savings attached to the property that taxes would not immediately crush me. Darren looked genuinely disappointed. That confirmed something. Dad, Meredith said, why are you doing this? Doing what? Punishing us for what happened years ago. There it was. The family rule I had learned too late. If they wanted access today, remembering yesterday became punishment. I haven't mentioned what happened. You don't have to. It's all over your face. Maybe that's guilt you're seeing. She stood. I came here wanting to rebuild something. Then sit down and rebuild it. You don't need a moving truck, Darren muttered. This is ridiculous. I looked at him. You told me I should have planned better. Consider this my plan. His face hardened. Meredith gathered her bag. They left before dinner. June whispered goodbye. Eli lingered long enough to say, the place is cool, Grandpa. Grandpa. I had not heard him call me that in years. Come back sometime without the boat, I said. He almost smiled. That night, Meredith sent a long text. I cannot believe how bitter you've become. We tried to include you in our future, and you threw an old mistake in our faces. Darren was right. You don't want family. You want us guilty. I typed 3 different answers and deleted all of them. Finally, I wrote, a relationship is not the same thing as access to my property. She replied, that tells me everything. It should have ended there. Instead, the manipulation changed form. Meredith began calling every few days. Softer voice. Childhood stories. Updates about the children. She sent pictures of June's school project and Eli's soccer game. I wanted to believe the property scare had forced her to remember I existed outside an inheritance. Then she asked whether Cedar Hollow was insured. Next call, whether there was a mortgage. Then whether Silas had restrictions on selling. I stopped answering financial questions. Darren started sending links to comparable lakefront sales. Just so you understand what you're sitting on. I did understand. That phrase told me he thought I was furniture. In early November, Meredith invited me to Thanksgiving at their house for the first time in 6 years. The kids really want you there, she said. I called June privately. Do you? She paused. I'd like to see you. Did your mother ask you to say that? No. That was enough. I agreed. Before Thanksgiving, something else happened. Silas's desk had a bottom drawer that stuck. One rainy afternoon, I finally pulled hard enough to open it. Inside was a stack of old photographs, repair receipts, and an envelope with my name. Silas's handwriting covered 3 pages. He wrote that he had watched my life from a distance more carefully than I realized. He knew about the money I had given Meredith. He knew about the motel because I had admitted it during one angry phone call years earlier. You keep thinking being needed is proof you're loved, he wrote. It isn't. A wrench is needed. That doesn't mean anybody asks how the wrench is doing. I laughed and cried at the same time. Another line stopped me. If your daughter comes back when she hears about this place, don't punish her for coming. Just make sure she came for you before you hand her a key. There were no investigators, no secret recordings, no elaborate trap. Just an old friend who knew me well enough to understand my weakness. I folded the letter and carried it in my coat pocket to Thanksgiving. Meredith's house looked exactly as I remembered, but more expensive. New kitchen, new light fixtures. Same basement door. I stood in the entryway longer than necessary, staring at it. Meredith hugged me. Darren shook my hand. June hugged me too, stiffly at first, then harder. Eli immediately asked about the lake. Can I come ice fishing this winter? If the ice is safe. Darren said, we'll all come. Eli looked disappointed. That was interesting. Dinner included Darren's parents, Meredith's sister-in-law, 2 cousins, and enough food for 30 people. For the first hour, everything stayed normal. Then Meredith brought out her phone. Before we eat dessert, I want one family photo. This year actually means something. She arranged us near the fireplace. I stood beside June. Darren moved me toward the center. Dad should be in the middle, Meredith said. Family patriarch. I nearly laughed. 6 months earlier, I had apparently been too unstable for their basement. Now I was patriarch. The photograph took 3 tries because Darren wanted better lighting. Meredith posted it before pie. Caption: some seasons teach you what really matters. Grateful for healing, second chances, and having Dad back where he belongs. Family always finds its way home. I stared at the screen. My home was 5 hours north. Beautiful, Darren's mother said. Then Darren raised his glass. To fresh starts, everyone drank. I did too. Then came the ask. Walter, Darren said casually, we've been thinking about something that might actually solve a lot of problems for everyone. Meredith touched his arm, as if reminding him to be gentle. He said they had spoken to a real estate agent familiar with lake property. Cedar Hollow could sell for a number that made my stomach tighten. Not because I wanted the money, because he had already spoken to someone about selling my home. Why did you contact an agent about property you don't own? Research isn't illegal. I didn't say it was. Meredith jumped in. Dad, listen before getting defensive. They proposed selling Cedar Hollow, setting aside enough to buy me a smaller condo near them, paying off their mortgage, putting money into June and Eli's college accounts, and investing the remainder. Everybody gets stability, Meredith said. Everybody? I asked. Yes. What do I get? A home near your family. I have a home. Darren sighed. A giant lodge 5 hours from medical care and everyone who can help you. You mean everyone who didn't help me 7 years ago? The room went quiet. Meredith looked furious. There it is. You brought up help. We have apologized for that. When? She stopped. Darren said, we're not doing a history lesson. Then don't use history you rewrote as leverage. June put down her fork. Eli looked at his plate. Meredith's eyes filled. Dad, do you want us to spend the rest of our lives begging? No. I want you to stop asking for things instead of forgiveness. I stood to leave. Meredith followed me into the hallway. Please don't go. The kids have waited years for this. The kids didn't ask me to sell my house. She lowered her voice. Darren's business is having a hard year. Finally, there it was. How hard? She looked toward the dining room. We're behind. On what? Some things. Mortgage? Silence. How much trouble are you in? Enough that selling Cedar Hollow would change everything. I stared at my daughter. And when were you going to tell me that? After you agreed in principle, I laughed once. Why? Because you make everything emotional. It is my house. It's an asset, not to me. Dad, please. You're 64. What are you going to do with 40 acres? Live. Her expression cracked. So you'd watch us lose everything? I watched myself lose everything from a motel you knew I was living in. She whispered, that isn't fair. No, it wasn't. I left. Back at Cedar Hollow, I spent the night angry enough to reorganize Silas's entire tool shed at 2 a.m. The next afternoon, June called. Grandpa, can I ask you something without Mom knowing? Yes. Did mom and dad really not let you stay here when you were sick? At their house? Yeah, they didn't. Long silence. Mom always said you chose the motel because you were stubborn. I sat down. I asked to use the basement for a few weeks. Did dad say you'd never leave? Something like that, June whispered. I'm sorry. You were 10. Still. Then she said, there's a family chat you're not in. My chest tightened. She sent screenshots. The chat was called Dad's Next Step. Meredith, Darren, Darren's parents, and 2 relatives. It had begun the day after they learned about Cedar Hollow. Darren, property is probably worth 1.5 minimum if Shoreline checks out. Meredith, he'll never sell if we push immediately. Darren's mother, get him around the kids, he's lonely. Meredith, Thanksgiving is the best chance. If we make it feel like a reunion first, then talk numbers. Another message, post the family photo before the conversation. He cares what relatives think. Darren, once he's near Madison, we can manage things easier. Meredith, he doesn't need to know how bad the business is until after. Then the sentence that hurt worse than the rest. Meredith, Dad always caves if he thinks somebody needs him. I read that line repeatedly, not because it was false, because it was true. My daughter knew the exact weakness she had inherited from years of watching me give. June texted, I'm sorry. I didn't know about this until tonight. Dad left his iPad open. I thanked her. Then I called Meredith. I've seen the chat. Silence. What chat? Don't, she exhaled. June had no right. Interesting first concern. Dad, it looks terrible out of context. What context improves? He always caves if he thinks somebody needs him. She began crying. I was scared. So was I when I asked for your basement. Why do you keep going back to that? Because you keep building the present on the assumption I forgot. She said Darren pressured her. She said the mortgage was behind. The business had debt. June's college savings were far smaller than they had pretended. I thought if we could just reset everything, with my house, with family resources. You still don't hear yourself. She became angry then. Fine, keep the lodge. Sit up there alone, proving a point while your daughter loses her home. If you lose the house, I am sorry. Truly. But I will not sell mine to preserve yours. You have no mortgage, because I inherited a home at 64 after living above a barbershop. So Silas matters more than your own daughter? Silas showed up when I had nothing he wanted. Silence. Then she hung up. Christmas passed without contact. June texted. Eli called once from his own phone and asked about ice fishing. I told him he could come if his parents agreed. They did not. In January, Meredith called again. Different voice. No performance. Darren moved out. I said nothing. We lost a major contract. He blamed me because you wouldn't sell. Then I found out he'd taken money from our home equity line without telling me. I'm sorry. I know you don't owe me anything. That was new. The house is probably going to be sold. I waited. Can I come talk to you? Just you? Just me. She arrived the next weekend driving an older car I had never seen. No sunglasses. No Darren. No plan for bedrooms. We sat on the dock under a sky the color of steel. Meredith looked older than she had at Thanksgiving. I keep thinking about the basement, she said. I did not answer. I told myself Darren made the decision. Did he? He pushed. I agreed. She wiped her face. The truth is, I was embarrassed. You were sick, broke, and I had spent years telling people how successful we were. I thought if you moved in, everyone would see how unstable things really were, because we were already using credit cards to stay afloat. Darren said you'd become another expense. I let myself believe him because it protected the life I wanted people to think I had. And now? Now I'm renting a 2-bedroom apartment with June and Eli half the time, and I work full-time at a home goods store while applying for office jobs. She laughed bitterly. I finally understand how insulting you should have planned better sounds when you're the one standing outside. I looked at her. Do you? I think I'm starting to. She asked whether I hated her. No. I would. That's because you still think boundaries need hate behind them, she cried quietly. Then came the question I knew had been coming since she parked. Could we stay in one of the cabins for a few months? I looked at the lake. 7 years earlier, I would have said yes, before she finished the sentence. No. Her face collapsed, but she did not argue. That mattered. Okay. I'm not finished. She looked up. Silas's friend Theo owns a hardware and marina supply store in town. He needs an office manager before spring. Apartment above the store comes with a job. It's not glamorous. I don't care. You would need to interview. I am not telling him to hire you. Okay. And if you get it, it is yours. You pay your own bills. You do not build your budget around me. Meredith nodded through tears. Okay, I love you. But I am not going to rescue you from the consequences of a life that was partly built by using me as emergency money. I understand. You may understand more after a year. She almost smiled. Probably. Theo hired her. Not because of me, he made sure to say. Meredith turned out to be excellent at organization when nobody was asking her to maintain an image. She moved north with Eli, while June stayed near Madison to finish senior year and visited on weekends. Meredith paid her own rent through work. She learned inventory. She complained about fishermen who ordered the wrong parts and blamed the store. She called me once to ask how to unfreeze an exterior pipe, and then stopped herself. Actually, never mind, I can look it up. I'll tell you, I said. Advice isn't the same as rescue. That became our new relationship. Advice freely given. Money rarely. Access earned. Darren's business finally folded. He and Meredith divorced. I did not celebrate. June was furious at both parents for months. Eli became quiet. Family damage rarely lands only on the adults who create it. I invited both kids to Cedar Hollow whenever they wanted, but I never used the lodge to compete with their father. That would have made me exactly what I was trying not to become. The following Thanksgiving, Meredith asked whether she could cook dinner at Cedar Hollow. Why, I asked. Because last Thanksgiving I turned dinner into a sales presentation, and I'd like one where nobody asks you for anything. I agreed. June came home from college. Eli brought a friend. Theo joined us. We ate at Silas's old table. Before dinner, Meredith placed her phone on a shelf. No staged family picture, she said. June laughed. Mom, you literally staged pictures for 15 years. I know. After dessert, Eli asked if we could take one anyway. We set the timer. Meredith stood beside me but did not touch me until I put my arm around her first. The photograph was terrible. Theo blinked. June was laughing. Eli held a fork. The lake behind us was almost black. Meredith looked ordinary and tired, and genuinely happy. She did not post it. 2 months later, while repairing shelves in the old boathouse, I found another envelope Silas had tucked behind a metal cabinet. He must have hidden letters around the property like some emotionally repressed scavenger hunt. This one was shorter. Walter, if the place gives you peace, keep it peaceful. But peace gets stale if you make it only about yourself. You spend your whole life fixing things. Fix something worth fixing. Attached was an old sketch of one of the unused cabins converted into a small workshop classroom. Silas had always talked about teaching young people practical trades. I expanded the idea. Over the next year, with help from the vocational center where I still work part-time, we turned 2 old cabins and the boathouse workshop into a weekend skills program for adults rebuilding after layoffs, divorce, caregiving, or financial collapse. Nothing dramatic. Basic electrical safety, carpentry, small engine repair, budgeting workshops taught by people more qualified than me. Participants paid what they could. Some stayed in the cabins for short training sessions. Meredith handled scheduling on Saturdays for extra income. I made one rule clear. Cedar Hollow was not hers. Not eventually, not emotionally, not because she worked there. I know, she said. Good. You're going to remind me forever, aren't you? Until I believe I don't need to. She smiled. Fair. Something unexpected happened during those workshops. I stopped thinking of the lodge as proof that life had finally compensated me. That had been another dangerous idea. Nobody is owed a mansion because they suffered. Silas's gift was not cosmic justice. It was one man choosing another man. The value was in what I did afterward. I also stopped measuring Meredith's change by apologies. Apologies are cheap when somebody wants access. I watched behavior. She stopped asking about my will. She never again suggested selling. When a realtor left a flyer in the mailbox promising record lakefront values, she handed it to me unopened. When her car needed a major repair, she took extra shifts instead of calling me. I offered to help once. She said, no, I can cover it in 2 months. I'd rather know I did. That answer told me more than every tear on the dock. June changed too. She had grown up inside a house where appearances were treated like survival. At 19, she told me she had always thought being poor or struggling meant you had failed morally, because that was how Darren talked about people. Then everything fell apart and Mom still woke up every morning, she said. Turns out being broke isn't contagious. Very scientific conclusion, she laughed. The first time she called me Grandpa without hesitation, we were sitting at the end of the dock watching a loon disappear under the water. She said, Mom told me something. That's dangerous. She said you never once asked us to choose you over Dad. You shouldn't have to. He asks us to choose him over her all the time. I said nothing. She looked at me. Why don't you hate him? I don't have enough years left to rent that much space in my head to Darren. She laughed and got quiet. I think I understand why Mom came back. Why? Not because of the lodge. I raised an eyebrow. She definitely came back because of the lodge. June smiled. The first time, after. I looked toward the store lights across the lake. Meredith was working late inventory. Maybe. 3 years have passed now. I still live in the main house. Nobody moved me into the caretaker cottage. I use that cottage for workshop instructors, and occasionally for June when she brings college friends north. Eli fishes off the dock and still leaves hooks where I nearly step on them. Meredith rents a small house 10 minutes from Theo's store. She was promoted to operations manager. She and I have dinner most Sundays. Not every Sunday. That matters too. We are family, not an obligation schedule. Darren moved to Illinois and started another contracting company with a partner. I wish him well from a distance large enough to feel healthy. He once texted me after the divorce, asking whether I would help with Eli's college, because whatever happened between adults shouldn't hurt the kids. I replied that I had already discussed education directly with both grandchildren. No details, no argument. He never answered. I created modest education accounts for June and Eli because I wanted to, not because anybody demanded them. The difference between generosity and exploitation is often whether you are allowed to say no without losing the relationship. I know that now. I did not sign Cedar Hollow over to Meredith. I did not promise it to the children. Maybe someday they inherit it. Maybe part of it supports the training program. Maybe I become 100 years old and haunt the dock personally. The important thing is that nobody plans my future for me anymore. That was the deepest wound Darren and Meredith reopened when they first arrived with the boat. It was not just that they wanted property. They looked at my life and treated me like the least important person inside it. Main house for them, cottage for me. Sale proceeds for their mortgage. Condo for me, future arranged, father managed. They never asked what I wanted because years of my giving had taught them my wants were flexible. That was partly their entitlement and partly my training. I spent decades proving love by removing myself from the equation. Marlene needed care, so I worked more. Meredith needed a down payment, so I emptied savings. Darren needed business money, so I delayed retirement. The children needed childcare, so I drove. Then when I needed something, everyone had become so used to Walter solving problems that Walter being the problem felt offensive. That is why self-worth arrived late for me. It was not looking in a mirror and deciding I was valuable. It was much less poetic. It was saying, no, you cannot move into my house. It was letting Meredith be angry without rushing to soothe her. It was hearing, you'd let your daughter lose everything? And answering, I'm sorry you're hurting, but I will not destroy my security to prevent you from experiencing consequences. It was learning that love can hand someone a job lead instead of a check, a door instead of a rescue helicopter, advice instead of ownership. Most importantly, it was allowing Meredith to rebuild without demanding she suffer enough to satisfy me. Boundaries should protect your life. They should not become a theater where another person performs pain until you feel powerful. I did not need her poor, divorced, or apologizing forever. I needed her to stop treating me like a resource. Once she did, something like a father and daughter could exist again, not the old version. Better, maybe. More honest. Silas understood something before I did. He knew people often return when circumstances change. That does not automatically make their return fake. Motives can be mixed. Meredith first came to Cedar Hollow because she saw an answer to her financial problems. That was ugly and true. But if I had frozen her forever in the worst motive she ever had, I would have become another person refusing to let somebody change. So I did not give her the house. I gave her time. She did not receive automatic trust. She received opportunities to behave differently. Over years, she did. That is a distinction I wish more families understood. Forgiveness does not mean restoring the old access level. You can forgive someone and still keep separate bank accounts, separate homes, separate keys, and separate expectations. You can love an adult child and refuse to finance them. You can miss someone and still refuse to let them move in. You can open a relationship without opening your wallet. And sometimes the strongest reconciliation begins when everybody finally learns that no is survivable. Last Thanksgiving, after dinner, Meredith stood beside me at the kitchen sink while I washed Silas's old roasting pan. She said, "Do you know what I think about every time I walk into this house? My charming personality? The first day, when Darren said you could live in the cottage. I remember. I agreed with him. I remember that too." She dried a plate. "I thought because you were older and alone, your life should take up less room than ours." I stopped washing. She continued, "I think that's what I'm most ashamed of, not the money. I looked at you and thought your future mattered less because I had kids and a mortgage and plans." I nodded. "That hurt more than the money?" "I know now." We stood quietly. Then she smiled. "For the record, you take up an exhausting amount of room." "Good," she laughed. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat in Silas's chair near the window. Snow had begun falling across the lake. The training workshop lights were dark. The house was quiet. I thought about the apartment over the barber shop, the motel before it, Darren standing in his doorway telling me there were reasonable weekly rates nearby. For years, I believed that moment proved I had failed at life. I was almost 60 and had nowhere safe to land. Now I understand it differently. Being turned away taught me which door I never wanted to become. That does not mean my door stays open to everyone. That is the part sentimental stories get wrong. A door with no lock is not loving. It is unsafe. What I wanted to build was a door that opened deliberately. People entered because there was respect on both sides, not because blood gave them a permanent key. Cedar Hollow became that for me. A home, a classroom, a place where my grandchildren could know me without somebody translating. A place where my daughter learned that coming home and owning home were not the same thing. A place where an old friend's generosity finally taught another old man how to stop confusing sacrifice with worth. If Silas were alive, I know exactly what he would say. He would complain that I had ruined a perfectly good fishing lodge by filling it with people and then secretly love every minute. His name is on a small wooden plaque over the workshop entrance. Nothing fancy. Silas Monroe Skills House. Underneath, one sentence from his letter: "Make sure they came for you before you hand them a key." I read it often. I do not read it cynically. It does not mean testing everybody or assuming kindness hides greed. It means learning to recognize the difference between someone who values what you own and someone who values the person standing beside it. Meredith had to learn that difference. So did I. The first time she returned, she came for Cedar Hollow. The second time, broken and ashamed, she came because she finally understood the man she had turned away. Over the years after that, she kept showing up even when there was nothing left to ask for. That is why she is still in my life. Not because she is my daughter, because she became someone who could be my daughter without requiring me to disappear inside the role of father. That is the ending I value most. Not Darren losing his business, not Meredith losing the big house, not me inheriting lakefront property. Those things are events. The real ending is smaller. A Sunday dinner where nobody needs money, a granddaughter calling just to tell me about class, a grandson leaving fishing gear in exactly the wrong place, a daughter who knocks before entering even though she knows the door is unlocked. And me, at 67, finally understanding that being loved should not require becoming useful enough that people cannot afford to lose you. So tell me honestly, if your adult child had taken your savings, turned you away when you were sick and nearly homeless, then returned years later only after learning you had inherited a valuable lake house, would years of genuine accountability and changed behavior ever be enough for you to rebuild that relationship? Or would the day they tried to move you into the cottage be the moment you permanently closed the door?